This was a pretty difficult video to make, particularly because there isn't any one place where I can put my finger on and say, yeah, that's it right there. That's when I became an atheist. That's when I stopped believing in God. It happened over a period of probably a few years. It was a very, very gradual thing. There was no abrupt or anything abrupt to it. And I had this whole video planned out, and I was going to go into my backstory and tell you all about, how I grew up as a Christian and all the things that I did as a Christian. But the video got too long, so I figured I'd cut all that out. It's not really that important anyway. All you need to know is that I was a Christian for 35 years, the better part of 35 years, all my life. I just turned 36, and now I'm not anymore. And so I'm just going to get down into the nitty-gritty of it and explain why, or exactly what happened to make me not believe in any God anymore. So like I said, I've been a Christian all my life. I grew up going to church just about every Sunday. And for the most part, I never had any doubts about my belief. And it wasn't until I was about 30 that my theistic worldview started to fall apart. And how that happened is I used to debate my atheist friends from time to time, about religion and about the validity of the Bible and about whether or not God existed. And it would force me to read my Bible more, which, if you're a Christian, is a good thing. That's what you want to do. But what ended up happening was I had realized that I had never read the Bible before, at least not from cover to cover. I had read bits and pieces. I had been in numerous sermons, Bible studies where we read books, we read excerpts, passages, stories separately. And we kind of jumped around and read verses. But I had never opened up and started in Genesis 1:1 and finished in Revelation. So I did, or at least I tried. And I used the word tried because the first time that I tried to read the Bible all the way through, I didn't get through the Old Testament. I think I got to about 1 Kings before I had to just stop. And I skipped the rest of the Old Testament and I went to the New Testament because that is what made me feel comfortable. And that's what I read. So I finished the entire New Testament. I remember reading the Old Testament and thinking, this is not my God. This is not the God that I worship. I don't know who this person is. And it's crazy because I had read parts of the Old Testament before. But sitting down and reading it like that all together, it puts a new perspective on the different characters of the stories. And that started to create a problem because I started to think to myself, why is the God of the Old Testament so much different than the God of the New Testament? Not only that, but there were things that I found when you read it like that all the way together that just don't make any sense. You verses in one chapter of one book will contradict verses from a chapter in another book. And I had gone to various pastors, various ministries, various churches, numerous leaders in different groups to try to get a better understanding of why this was or why I perceived it that way. And the answers that I always received never really satisfied me at all. Most of them were along the lines of, you just need to have faith and believe that is what's true. This is God's word, and that's what it is. So there was never really any logical explanation to any question that I had. There was nothing that was concrete. And I know that's asking a lot for a faith-based religion, but that's who I am. Sorry. Any attempt at logic was just creating more questions. And I ended up leaving those places with more questions than when I walked in. So I just trusted that that's what it was. God was real, that my understanding was not on the level of his or of the people who wrote the Bible, and so I needed to just have faith and believe. And I read the Bible again. This time I read it from cover to cover, and I finished it. I did it in about 10 weeks. And you'd think that would solidify my faith, but I ended up finding more contradictions and things that just didn't make any sense. Nonetheless, I just chalked it up to my lack of understanding. And, you know, maybe if I read it more, and maybe if I prayed more and sought after God more, then, you know, he would begin to reveal to me the things that I seek. So the third time I read the Bible all the way through, I changed the settings in my app to chronological order. And so Genesis obviously comes first, and then in the middle of Genesis, it cuts out and goes straight to Job. And then it goes back to Genesis, and it interjects some Psalms in there too. It's basically, you know, it's exactly what it says. It's chronological order. But let's go back to Job. Job is by far the most fucked up book in the entire Bible. Never have I seen an omniscient, omnipotent being portrayed with such humanistic qualities. If you don't know the story of Job, I'm pretty sure everybody does. And what they try to do is say that it's a story of triumph. It's a story of, you know, if you just trust God, then you'll get back everything that you once had plus more. And there's a different kind of philosophical take on it too. It's, you know, it's not really about what you do. That good things can happen to bad people, or good things can happen to good, or bad things can happen to good people. I'm sorry. And so it just throws out the window this whole notion of if you're just, then you will be rewarded. If you're unjust, you will be punished. And according to Job, that's not how it works anymore. So, beginning of the story, you find out Job is pretty much, he's a blameless man. That's how the Bible describes him. He is without blame. I wouldn't go so far as to say he's perfect, because the Bible doesn't really say that, but it does say he's blameless, and you can infer whatever you want from that. So in heaven, God is chilling out with his angels, and out of nowhere it says Satan walks up. Immediately, the first thing I thought was, like, how nigga, like, how the fuck did you just? I thought you were cast out, right? And a lot of people will say, "Oh no, it's not Satan; it's the accuser or the prosecutor." No, the Bible says it's Satan. It says clear as day, and then Satan was among them too, right? So Satan comes up, and to make this short, pretty much bets God that he can make Job curse his name. So the only reason why Job is good is because you gave him all this stuff. Take all this stuff away from him, and he's just going to be as bad as everyone else that's on earth right now. And God says, no, I don't think that's going to happen. Okay, the problem I have with this is God is omniscient. So why did you make the bet? If you know what's going to happen already, why even entertain this nonsense? Or why did you let Satan in heaven? Why? How does he come and go as he please? You cast Adam and Eve out of the garden, but Satan can come in and out of heaven when he wants to. That doesn't make any sense, man. Sorry. It just doesn't. So the first time, Satan goes down and he takes all of Job's stuff. Kills all his livestock. Kills his kids. Kills his wife. And Job's left by himself. still won't curse God's name. Satan comes back to God and says, hey, only reason why he's still praising you is because he's in good health. So God says, fine, you can do whatever you want to him, just don't kill him. And that's what happens. He pretty much just does whatever he wants to him. He has all these diseases. His stuff is gone. His people are dead. And he's asking God why. And even his friends come at that point, and they're having a discussion about it. And they come from the side of, hey, God's just. And he meets justice with punishment. So if you are doing wrong, then you will be punished. If you are doing what you're supposed to be doing, then you will be rewarded. Since you are not being rewarded, you are being punished, then there's something wrong that you did. And Job was like, man, I didn't do shit. I didn't do anything. And so his friends were like, dude, you're lying. So this has already gotten too long. But you can tell how frustrated I am just talking about this book. In the end, God comes down and pretty much flexes on Job. Does not apologize for anything that he did. He even admits that Job was right and that his friends are wrong, and makes Job prepare an offering, a sin offering, on behalf of his friends. His friends were the ones who had God's back and saying, hey, God is just. This didn't happen for no reason. And Job's like, no, it happened for no reason. And God's like, yeah, it happened for no reason. So here you have a God who knows everything, who lets the adversary come into his domain, make a bet over some shit he already knows was going to happen, the outcome of. He takes his greatest servant and shits on him. And then when the servant asks why, he comes down from heaven and flexes on him. Like, bro, you don't ask me no questions. I'm God. You're you. When you become God, then you can ask questions. That has got to be the most narcissistic shit I have ever read in my entire life. And I'm sorry that I'm saying it like that, because I know not a lot, but some people who are going to watch this video are Christians. That is how I see the story. You ruined a man's life over, if you're real, you ruined a man's life over a bet you already knew the outcome of. And then when he asks you about it, you spend, 4 chapters talking about how much greater you are than he is, and how he has no room to say anything. Ridiculous. In the end, God ends up restoring everything Job had. He gives him a new family, which doesn't mean shit to me because he's destroyed the old one. I don't want a new wife and kids. I want the ones that I had before that died for no reason. After I read this book, it kind of hit me in a different place. And it's just reading it for the 3rd time. It's just like, there's got to be something that I'm missing. Because I'm a Christian. I believe in God. God is just. There's a story that describes God that is not anything like I've ever thought God was. There is something that I'm missing. So, with all the things total with that story that don't make any sense, I went looking for God. I went searching for God. I wanted to know who God was. I wanted to know where his book came from. I wanted to know every possible thing I could know. I went looking. And I came across a video on YouTube. Now, before you say anything, no, I did not let a YouTube video take my faith in God away. The video is by a guy named Evidence, and the name of the video is A History of God. Everything that I am about to say can be verified. I challenge you to not believe a word of what's coming out of my mouth until you go look at it for yourself. So I watched this video, and at the end of the video, the first thing I thought was, this video is got to be the biggest bullshit I've ever seen in my life. There's no way any of this is true. And I start looking, reading articles, reading books, going through papers written by biblical scholars, and it turns out every word of it is true. Christianity is rooted in paganism. It was originally a polytheistic religion. The Hebrews were originally Canaanites, and they worshipped an entire pantheon of gods. When I say they were polytheistic, I don't mean in the sense of the Trinity. The Trinity wasn't even a thing in that time. They worshipped an entire pantheon of gods, much like the Greeks. And Yahweh wasn't even thought of, let alone worshipped, as the one and only true God, quote unquote, until about 650 BCE. People have been around way before that. So the first thing I think is, well, where was he before then? You know, if he's supposed to be eternal, and he was always there, you would think his presence would have been made known before 650 BCE. But no, if you want to find out all this stuff, start with the Enuma Elish, which is the original Babylonian creation story. What ended up happening was, when the original Torah was written, it was of a polytheistic nature. The God Most High was El Elyon, and I know it says that in the Bible, but we'll get back to that. El Elyon had a wife. Her name was Asherah, and they had sons and daughters, one of which was Baal, who is demonized in the Bible. And these gods are who the Hebrews worshipped. Through centuries of propaganda and political garbage, the Hebrews eventually turned over to monotheism. It was not some supernatural thing, and it wasn't some mysterious miracle that no one knows anything about. This is all recorded in ancient history. They started out worshiping El Elyon as the God Most High. And if you notice in the Bible, it talks about El Elyon in Genesis, where it talks about how Abraham paid tithes to the Most High. He paid tithes to the high priest of the Most High, which is Melchizedek. And it said Melchizedek was the high priest of the Most High God. Well, if Melchizedek is the high priest of the Most High God, that is not Yahweh, who are they talking about? The Bible says that Jesus was a high priest. Jesus isn't mentioned anywhere in that story. El Elyon, eventually Yahweh comes on the scene, and he is a son of El Elyon. Excuse me. And he starts out as the Hebrews' god of war, which is why the Old Testament is filled with war. is because that's who he was to them at that time. The Old Testament, it was not written by Moses. Like the first 5 books were not written by Moses. There were several different authors. They were unknown, but through science, they figured out that there are linguistic patterns. And these patterns obviously can be traced back. Each time there was a, quote, new prophet that arose, they went back and rewrote the Torah to make it seem more monotheistic. So now you have the original Torah, which has a pantheon of gods, and the Torah that exists today, which is monotheistic. Yahweh wasn't worshipped until 650 BCE, and there are centuries of manipulation through man in the Bible. It is not a holy book. It is not a mysterious thing. It's a regular ass piece of literature that was manipulated by men throughout thousands of years. I said all that to say this. If all that is true, and it is documented, it's historical evidence, archaeological evidence that backs it up, then the Bible I have a hard time believing that any of it is real. Because I know now that it's not the word of God. It's a word that some guy wrote, or a group of authors wrote. It is not the inspired word of God. It is a piece of literature that survived through thousands of years. So if there's a question as to whether or not the Bible is valid, then I have to also question the God of that Bible. As a Christian, everything I ever knew about God came from the Bible. And if the Bible isn't real, then everything that I knew about God isn't real. And I have to rethink my entire perception of who or what God is, or if there even is one. Now, some may ask me the question, why can't you just have faith and believe? Having faith and believing isn't good enough for me anymore. I'm past all that. I need something that's beyond faith. And that's why I can't believe anymore. Some may also ask the question, well, just because you find out all this information, and just because the Bible may have been written by man and manipulated over the centuries, doesn't mean that God isn't real. And to that I say, you are absolutely correct. It doesn't mean that there is no God or that the God of the Bible isn't real. However, it is reasonable for me to come to the conclusion that it's not real, considering that it is just a literary piece of work created by men, talking about a God that I have never seen or never heard from. Knowing what I know, I just can't believe anymore. I can't do it anymore. If I try to believe in some God or believe in some higher power, everything just comes to a screeching halt and crashes. See, there's biblical history, and then there's actual history. There are a lot of things that the Bible talks about as history and that never happened. It magnificently intertwines real history, real known history, with fiction. For instance, when you read Matthew and you hear the story about how Herod the Great sent the armies to kill all the kids under 2 years old, and Mary and Joseph fled. Yeah, it never happened. Herod was already dead. He had been dead for 10 years before Jesus was supposedly born. It was a parallel between that Jesus in that story and Moses and the story of how he was found by and came found by Pharaoh. And so there are numerous other stories like that just never happened. The Hebrews were there's no historical record of the Hebrews ever being slaves in Egypt. The evidence actually points to the opposite. You know, the pyramids were built by well-paid Egyptian citizens. That's what evidence says. So, if you're asking me to choose between biblical history and actual history, I got to choose actual history because that's what we know happened. For a long time, I didn't want to admit that I was an atheist. I fucking hate that. I hated that word. Yeah, I called it the A word. I couldn't stand it. I just kept thinking to myself, there's a rational explanation for all of this that includes God being real. But eventually I just came to the grips of, yeah, there is a rational explanation for everything, and it's not true. That's what your explanation is. It's not real. It's not real, and you have to deal with it. There's no one coming to save you. You are on your own. Your destiny is your own. Your life is whatever you make it. There is no one that is watching over you. Every aspect of your life is your responsibility, and you have to act as such. Once I realized that, it was easier for me to say that I was an atheist, especially being black. It's like it's really stigmatized in the black community to not believe in God and be gay. And I'm 1 out of 2. So that I mean, it is what it is. What also came along with being able to admit that I was an atheist is this overwhelming sense of freedom and tranquility. It's very hard to describe. It was almost liberating. Like my mind was no longer bound by any presuppositional thought. It's truly free. And I don't mean it's free in the sense of I can do whatever I want, which I mean I can do whatever I want, but I'm still responsible for my actions. It's not, hey, I don't believe in God anymore, so that means that I can do all bad things. No, that's not what it is when I say that I'm free. I am free from someone else thinking for me, or free from immediately reverting to what does God think about that? What does the Bible say about that? Because I don't give a shit. God had 35 years to tell me what he wanted. If he's real, he knows that I asked him several times. I begged to be told what it is I'm supposed to be here to do and how to do it. But there's no one there. So ultimately, I was just talking to myself. But Dustin, aren't you afraid you're going to go to hell? No. Bible's not real. Hell doesn't exist. Well, what happens when you die? I don't know. I don't know how we all got here. I don't know what happens when we die. And the reality is no one does. No one has ever died and lived to tell about it. That's the truth. So anyone who says they know what happens when we die, they're fucking lying. Because no one does. And so I'm going to take this little time that I have here on this little blue planet, and I'm going to live as best as I can. I'm going to be a husband, a father, and I'm going to be the best man that I can be. The threats of hell doesn't really affect me. Doesn't exist. At least not to me, it doesn't. And if it does, I guess that's some shit I gotta pay for later. But I'm not gonna spend now worrying about it. I spent 35 years worrying about it, and that time is done. The time for worrying about what someone else wants for my life, it's over. This is my life, and I'm gonna live it. I'd encourage everyone else to do the same. For the record, this is not a Christian bashing session. My intent going forward is not to bash anyone's religious beliefs. As a matter of fact, to give a good example, I joined a Facebook group for atheists, and I was in it for about an hour, and I left. I left because there wasn't any thought going on. No one was thinking about anything. There was no thought-provoking posts. There were no intricate discussions. They were just talking shit about Christians all the time. So no, I'm not going to do that. That's not who I am either. So for anyone who thinks that's what this is, it's not. My wife is Christian. I love her dearly, and she believes what she believes. I respect her beliefs, and that's the end of that. We talk about it a lot, actually, and it's refreshing to have a discussion with someone who has opposing viewpoints and not be at each other's throats and not be yelling, or it's just good to disagree. And it goes back to that whole, I don't have to agree with everything you do or say in order to love you. And I don't need to be a Christian to do that either. So I'm going to wrap this up. That is how I became an atheist. And who knows? Maybe there is a God. I don't really think there is. But whatever. I'm pretty sure if he, she, or it wanted to make themselves be known by now, it would have happened. But yeah, that's how. Thank you for sitting here and listening to me talk about this for half an hour. I really appreciate it. And I want all of my friends, my real friends, and my family to know nothing's changed. I'm still me. I still love you. And as long as you remember that, we can go on and we can have great relationships. We don't need to be a hive mind in order to get along. And with that, I will see you later.